Right, hello everyone. Welcome to the 8th instalment of the Internally Screening podcast. My name's Adam.
I am Rupert.
And today, as per usual, we will be talking about a couple of films. One new film and one old film. But first, we're going to talk about some, hype around some upcoming films. Because as of when this comes out, when this podcast comes out, it will be only 10 agonizing days until we get Zack Snyder's Justice League, finally, after all these moons.
It was promised to us, it was promised to us in no uncertain terms that, finally justice will be paid to Daddy Snyder, the single greatest filmmaker since Kubrick. I mean, frankly, Kubrick would be embarrassed if he ever saw Batman vs Superman. He'd be like, why did I even fucking bother doing all this bullshit?
Luckily, Kubrick is not alive to this day to be as humiliated as he would have been if he ever got into a video fist fight, if you like, with leader.
If Zack Snyder got in a fight with Kubrick, we both know that Zack Snyder would win. That man's fucking ripped.
True. He's yoked.
He is. He's got fucking shredded. He looks like Batman. He looks like Superman.
Well, don't give him too much credit.
Well, I mean, in a weird way, I mean, we've discussed this a fair bit over the course of our podcasts, but on the meme side, I think it is probably one of the funniest things ever that a studio has been bullied by like a bunch of comic book nerds into releasing probably an even like more bizarre version of the absolute mess that was it 2017 Justice League film, whatever, the one that Joss Whedon did. I think that's hilarious. But on the more positive side, I'm happy for Zack Snyder, even though I think he's like not very good. I'm glad it's coming out. Yeah, we all stand to benefit. At the end of the day, it's just another film. So
exactly.
That's good.
And it's not only is it a film, it's a glorious 4-hour epic. This is truly
it's
an
absolute meme fest as well. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Well,
there's like so much meme potential. We don't even know. We've only seen like very minimal amounts of it. I mean, we've pretty much seen all of it, but it's going to be recolor graded. But there's going to be a lot of meme potential, I feel.
Well, as we've already established with two of the greatest memes already to arrive in the year of our Lord 2021, we have the Joker on the cross doing with the ring of thorns round his head, doing like the, which is just confusing given that Zack Snyder's doing Jesus imagery for Jared Leto's Joker as well as Superman. Like which one's actually Jesus? But also the iconic, artfully delivered "We live in a society." Jared Leto could not be more of a meme at this point with his performance of Joker. Like it's unreal.
I want to know, like, are they leaning, like, they obviously somebody is leaning into the meme by putting that "we live in a society" line in it. But, like, is Zack Snyder also leaning into the meme that people have about how he's really obsessed with the Jesus imagery by doing this again? Or again, is this, like, I just want to know which marketing genius has come up with this, because it's a absolutely fucking god tier marketing ploy to put like this in there, because it's not obvious. It's not so obvious. I mean, it's pretty clear that someone is in the production memeing it up. I just want to know, how
someone on
explicit is it?
Someone doing the trailer edit was like, "This is gold." But leaning into your idea of like maybe someone on set is like really in like on the ball with the banter about like Zack Snyder's filmmaking. I think it would be hilarious if that line wasn't in the film at all and that they only recorded that line just to make people go nuts for the trailer. Like I think that would be fucking brilliant.
It probably will be the case. I mean, it's so often been the case these days that you remember like the Rogue One trailer, like 90% of that trailer wasn't even in the film.
Yeah, but that was kind of its own issue.
Well, yeah, I guess a lot of this new footage is hardly going to be left on the cutting room floor. Probably a much higher percentage of the stuff they actually shoot for this remake is going to be used because they actually have to include new stuff, if you get what I mean. So, like, it wouldn't make sense to cut as much as you normally would from what they shoot. I mean, they're probably still going to cut a lot, but yeah, I mean, I'll be a little bit disappointed if it doesn't have the "we live in a society" line in the film.
I mean, yeah, I guess it would be disappointing on one level, but also an excellent execution of a meme in another. And I've heard talk that Zack Snyder's trying to like build this towards, or had it in his head that he was originally going to build this towards his like Dark Side sequel. Where he was going to have the like this sort of the dystopia that Batman sees in like this future vision ends up actually happening. And I think that would be, I'm really crossing my fingers that this film is successful, because as we've said, we're not particularly huge fans of Justice League, but I'm all aboard for the roller coaster. Do you know what I mean? Like,
well, it's a win-win for me, because I'm not invested in like any of these superhero film franchises like that personally, because I didn't really grow up with comic books, and I think the films are generally range from pretty good to like bad. Like none of them really sort of leave that range for me. So if it fails, like I won't care. Like if it's a complete flop and everyone hates it, that's fine by me. And I'll enjoy ripping it to shreds with you when we review it, if that's the case. And I will gain some, small sadistic measure of enjoyment from the fans being mad that nobody likes it except for them. But then if it's like really successful and it ends up making even more of these ridiculous Snyder films, then that's a win for me as well, because that just means I've got more more entertainment,
more meme content.
Yeah, exactly.
And you know what? I still think it's really wholesome that a bunch of these actors have kind of rallied behind the movement. Ben Affleck was in a really awful, bleak place with like his alcoholism, and I think this could give his career a bit more of like a lease of life. Like kind of, I imagine part of his like sadness and difficulties was like, you remember the reception to Batman v Superman, and there was the sad Affleck meme. Just him like miserable in that interview where he realized just like how badly things had gone, because playing Batman should be like playing James Bond. It should be like, here you go, here's like countless like endless money and like adoration for your whole life. So hopefully this does bits for Ben Affleck.
On top of that, I think it's really, if we're on the wholesome train, I think, whatever I might think about Zack Snyder as a internet personality or director, I think it's nice that, after the tragic circumstances around his family that meant he originally had to leave the project, it's very nice that he has been able to come back to it, because for every criticism I have of him, I don't believe he's someone who's not passionate about films. He clearly very much is. And whether I think the product is good or not, I can always tell when I'm watching a Zack Snyder film. And on top of all the difficulties he was facing, it must have felt quite galling to have to leave the project in the way that he had to. So I think it's quite nice that he's been offered a second chance to do this thing that he's clearly passionate about. So from that perspective, I think it's good. Whether the film is good or not, I mean, I'm just excited either way.
Not long to wait now. In 10 days' time, we will finally be witness to the greatest moment of movie history.
God, 4 hours.
Last podcast we reviewed Citizen Kane, and then next podcast we will review the new Citizen Kane.
Citizen Kane 2.
This time it's personal.
If they could get Orson Welles in to play like Alfred, I would love that.
Oh my god. If they could do the the facial reanimation, I'd be down. Do a Grand Moff Tarkin?
Yeah, just deep fake Orson Welles in and get like an impersonator. Could just get Brian Blessed's voice with Orson Welles.
I'm not sure. I'd get Brian Blessed and Orson Welles.
We'll do that. I want Brian Blessed as Batman. I'm Batman.
I'd watch that for like a skit. I don't know how well that would pan out over the course of a movie. I feel like he'd give himself away. Like, he's got such a distinctive voice. Like, you would guess.
That would make it even funnier. It would make it even funnier that no one in the film was acknowledging that, Batman, you have the exact same voice as Brian Blessed. And if they tried to write around it like they do in Batman vs Superman, where he has like the voice modulator that makes his voice deeper, just imagine how ridiculous Brian Blessed would sound with his voice pitched down to be lower. That would just, I mean, I'm selling myself right here.
Or they get Matt Berry in. They get Matt Berry to specifically voice Batman when he's
even
Batman.
better. That would be amazing. That would be amazing. I think. All right, I've got to go, mate. I've got an email. I've got to draft to Brian Blessed
and to Zack Snyder. Sack Ben
absolutely.
Affleck right now. The people have spoken, and we want Brian Blessed. He's even got blessed in his name. If you want to chuck in Jesus imagery, the man is called Blessed.
Yeah, fucking.
Think about it.
It's a match made in heaven.
Very literally.
All right, so Malcolm and Marie is a film directed by Sam Levinson, starring John David Washington and Zendaya of Spider-Man fame primarily, but also of Euphoria fame, which is a TV show I and you have not seen, but is directed by Sam Levinson, who sort of appears to have done this Malcolm and Marie film as a bit of an aside, since the production of Euphoria, much like pretty much everything, was shut down due to COVID-19. This was shot, from what I've read, on a pretty bare bones set of about 12 people, no makeup or costume designers, apparently, and very strict COVID measures, the actors doing their own makeup and stuff. So quite an unconventional production.
Okay.
As you'd imagine, it's all very, very minimalistic. It's been released to Netflix, which kind of adds to the minimalism in a way. Yeah, it's kind of received a bit of a mixed reception, especially for some of the meta elements of the film. Sam Levinson has directed stuff outside of Euphoria, and he's been a bit of an idiosyncratic filmmaker from the get-go, and he clearly has a lot to say through this film. And to be honest, of the reception I've seen of the film, I find myself siding with those who found this to be quite difficult to get through. But that's not to say there aren't admirable elements to it. So yeah, what did you think?
Well, going into this, I kind of knew that you weren't a big fan of it. It was sort of proposed to me as, hey, should we watch this film? It's shit. So, there was some slightly... my expectations were slightly leaned in a certain direction, but
doesn't sound like me.
I don't feel so negative on the film so much as I feel quite sort of ambivalent and straight down the middle with it. I think there's plenty to admire about the film. I think it's, speaking broadly, it's a gorgeous looking film. It's there's some really good moments of acting, less so on the writing side. I think that's a lot of where the awkwardness comes in the film. I also think there's kind of in spite of it looking beautiful, there's kind of a pretentiousness to the way it's presented. It doesn't, which we'll get more into, but I certainly didn't hate it, as I feel you may have, and others have, but it did annoy me in quite a few places. And I think that largely comes down to the writing, which I guess we should get into first and foremost, because it is the kind of the elephant in the room.
So the crux of the controversy essentially comes from the obviously very intentional choice, but nonetheless a choice that was made, of this film being written and directed by Sam Levinson, who is a white guy, son of a famous director, Barry Levinson, and he wrote and directed this film with two black actors, with a lot of contemporary racial stuff being discussed in the film. On top of this, John David Washington, he seems to quite clearly be used as a conduit / mouthpiece for a lot of Sam Levinson's real world opinions in some situations, and his frustrations, at points kind of feeling a bit like one of those characters written into a film to sort of almost talk directly to the camera. In a way, it's like you have him as the director, and Zendaya is almost like an audience stand-in, because a lot of the film is taken up by him just kind of talking at her.
Ranting, just going on and on and on.
And while I do completely acknowledge that there is an element of self-awareness here, and that he's not supposed to be a likeable character, you're supposed to find him really fucking annoying, is what I can take from this. I don't, having watched it, I don't think there could be any other intention. But despite it being intentional, I did find it a little bit weird that this director decided to air a lot of his sort of racial grievances with, white America, I guess, in this way. I found that just awkward more than anything. I don't know if I have enough expertise to comment on the politics of it outside of that. But I also just found a lot of the film industry stuff that he talks about, it felt like very whiny, and even though he's probably saying a lot of very true things, even though it's annoying on purpose, I also just found it annoying flat out.
Yeah. I mean, sort of going off that, I think what's uncomfortable is that he's sort of making, it feels like, to legitimize what he's saying about like how, I don't know, sensitive or patronizing the industry can be when it comes to race, which undoubtedly is true. Like the whole wokeness scenario, it works both ways. Like, you know, there's plenty of like racism and like awful bigotry in any given industry, but there's also a lot of people on the sort of hard other end of it where, you know, the tiniest misstep is misread or interpreted as some kind of injustice. And I think what's kind of insidious about this is that if he's writing it from a sort of character insert type, you know, he's the director talking through this character, choosing to frame it with a black actor almost seems like a tool to legitimize what he's saying. Because if he comes through as a white man saying, oh, I think that the way that the industry treats race and puts kid gloves on everything that people have to say is really, you know, not only naive but also kind of insulting to the people it's trying to supposedly protect, which definitely there's merit to that argument, undoubtedly. Like, it's not something I inherently disagree with. I just think that like the way it's all framed here is kind of a bit uncomfortable.
You can't really help but read into the intentions of something when it's this explicitly meta.
Yeah. And even beyond that, like you were saying, even if you were just like, right, whatever, that's just all contextual stuff, is the film any good beyond that? I would say that his ranting and rambling about like how the movie industry, you know, is either out to get him or is just, you know, emotionless and kind of cold and always trying to like label things one way or whatever. That's all just like deeply, deeply annoying and like not relatable at all to like 99% of your audience. Like the majority of your audience are not fucking screenwriters for Hollywood movies, right? This is like such a and there's nothing wrong necessarily with like a narrow focused film, but like there's nothing to be relatable in terms of like you trying to appeal to me. Like not only do you have an annoying character who's kind of, you know, really self-obsessed, constantly talking at Zendaya's character and at the audience, but what he's talking about is like so sort of alien to the majority of people out there. You know, oh no, I'm so successful, Hollywood keeps trying to label me as this. Like, oh God forbid this he's being described as the new Spike Lee, and he's sort of saying, oh, but they wouldn't describe me as a white director. But you know, the point grander than that is you're big enough to be considered alongside Spike Lee. So if this is Sam Levinson's insert character, it's like, well done, Sam Levinson, you're really fucking successful. Shut the fuck up and like get over yourself.
Also, I just want to know if anybody ever compared Sam Levinson to Spike Lee, or if he was just salty that nobody had yet, so he had to put it in his film.
Maybe he was annoyed that he wasn't getting compared to black directors. He was like, maybe. I just only get compared to white directors. I don't want to be the next Scorsese.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Like, I feel like this could have worked if there was more of a contrast between Zendaya and John David Washington, because you could get a level of satisfaction from him being a dick and then her being kind of like his foil, or there could have been something interesting there. You could have written the character in the exact same way and then maybe gotten something out of it if there was some kind of like chemistry or unique angle to their relationship. But honestly, while I thought we'll get to the performances. Well, I thought Zendaya was pretty good in the film. Probably the highlight for me in terms of just raw acting. She also was really annoying. I also couldn't stand her character. So you've got essentially this guy who's ranting and raving about like all of these things, and then all of these like really sort of petty director type issues about how his work is going to be received and blah 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 blah. And then on top of that, you have Zendaya, who has some legitimate grievances with him, who then sort of seems to handle it in the most sort of petty and passive aggressive way possible. And I mean, I don't think that you have to have a film full of like likable characters. An example I can think of is like Uncut Gems is a film with there's like no likable characters, and that is one of my favourite films of that year because it was so good. And I think what makes characters interesting, I think primarily from like an audience perspective, is like their motivation. Like what makes something like Uncut Gems, which is filled with absolute arseholes as characters, is that they all have really strong or conflicting motivations, and her motivation is kind of left as sort of this mystery, which made her feel a bit detached, in my opinion. Like I couldn't really, even though she's the one I'm supposed to be, I feel like the film is telling me to relate to. I found that difficult, if that makes sense, because so much of her character is left up to be mysterious until sort of later into the film where you get a few more details, and by that point it's too late and the film is already losing steam.
I think they kind of build the structure, well, I mean, to speak broadly on it, the structure of the film is very simplistic. It is literally just a sort of an argument in several steps, you know, sort of each scene constitutes like a different phase of the argument, you know, and in some ways it's like somewhat true to life. It's like outside of like the subject matter of what they're talking about, which isn't particularly relatable, the scenario they're in is quite sort of familiar to a lot of people, I'm sure. Like this winding nature of an argument where in the nastiest way possible, people like sort of taking swipes at one another, trying to bring each other down a peg, like the idea of like winning the argument rather than resolving it. And as a consequence, each like part of what makes each character so unlikable is this in this film is just what great lengths they go to make the other one feel like total dog shit. It feels like the film is trying to build towards this grand revelation of like the real reason like that the argument is happening. I guess what kind of happens really is that it's framed, the beginning of it is he's at an award ceremony, they've just come back from an award ceremony and he forgot to thank her, and she's really cold to him, and then at the end and the whole kind of argument, it goes so deep into all of their grievances with one another, their personal history, and then at the end of the film it's like the thing that was really driving the whole argument was still very simply that he didn't thank her and he didn't value her, and she just didn't feel valued. And I think there is something to be said for that. I think again that kind of speaks to like a certain truth of you know, going through those situations. But when your film feels like you're just sort of like being dragged through this like emotional like slog, only for the film to be like, haha, I had this like one little trump card up my sleeve, that, you know, my M. Night Shyamalan twist is that what you thought the film was about initially actually was what it was about. And so I find like being sort of pulled towards this like conclusion that's just like kind of mildly satisfying but not particularly enlightening in any way. I think that for me was why I didn't necessarily find Zendaya as frustrating as what you're saying, but I think therein lies one of my key frustrations with that character.
I think that film where the conclusion is that, you know, there are just underlying problems, and that, you know, it felt to me like, you know, the ending of the film just implied that, you know, this is stuff that they're going to have to work through, and they're two imperfect people. I think that kind of film can work, but with these kind of like bottle films where you just basically have two people talking for the whole film, they always remind me of each other. So the two films that this really reminded me of were Before Midnight and Certified Copy, which are two absolutely amazing films, so that probably didn't help. But not only are they... I'm sad to
say I've not seen those films,
well,
so
yeah,
my film pleb status is being shown full effect.
I apologise, that wasn't my intention, but just to quickly flash my film expert card. But those two films, not only are they really, really good and very similar to this in terms of the base premise of there just being two people talking for most of it, they also have absolutely amazing endings. So, like, I could have forgiven a lot of the elements of this film which I didn't like if it could have brought a really conclusive, interesting finale to it. And I felt like at times, you know, some of the more honestly, the further it was very frustrating because the further into the film, the less patience I had with it. But then also, I feel like a lot of the best scenes were saved towards the end of the film. Probably my favourite scene in terms of writing was the scene where Zendaya's in the bathtub and he's kind of being a massive cunt as per his character.
Right, yeah.
That was probably the two best performance moments of the film, and I think the writing was pretty good there as well.
Yeah, I'd go with that performance-wise for sure.
If we could get on to performances, I'm probably going to disagree with most people here and just say that I thought John David Washington was fucking dreadful in this film. I thought he was just completely unconvincing, and I mean, it doesn't help that his character was really annoying, but I found his performance annoying. Everything he did, it felt like massive overacting. With his whole body, with like the bit where he like sits down and he's like angrily eating the mac and cheese. It was painful to watch. It was so overcooked on every front. I couldn't stand him in this film.
I mean, I'm definitely not gonna agree with you 100%. I would say I think a lot of the issues do boil down to the writing, but I definitely noticed a lot of the problems you had with it, and it kind of came across to me very theatre. And I think these sorts of films where they are like narrow focused in like one location between just two actors or a very limited number of actors, they do quite closely resemble stage plays, right?
Yeah.
In fact, a film it reminded me of is Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, written by Tennessee Williams with Elizabeth Taylor, I think, in it.
That's a film I haven't seen, so
there you go. That's
2-1. 2-1 to me.
There you go. There's my fucking take that, bitch. But yeah, so again, like, you know, a film adaptation. That was a film adaptation of a play, and so a family trapped in one sort of space. I'm going off on a bit of tangent. Coming back to John David Washington, I think the issue is that the overacting kind of works in a stage sense, and I felt that leaking in here, but it was hard to tell.
I think this might have worked better as a play, and he might have just performed it like that on purpose. I'm not saying he's I know he's not a bad actor, but
no.
I mean, but this is a film, and I don't think he needed to shout for the people at the back, you know.
No, I can't tell if that's what was a conscious decision, but it's something that came out to me as like perhaps it was just coincidental that like the environment kind of brought that out of him, and it could just be like kind of again the poor writing, maybe some poor direction, just like because I agree it did feel very like aggressively over the top in a lot of instances, but I do think there were moments where he quietened down, like you mentioned with the bathroom scene, and there were other scenes throughout where I think there was a calmness and a consideration with what he was doing, and it felt very legitimate.
There's something about him. He almost sounds like a European actor in terms of his voice putting on an American accent.
Maybe
it's really weird.
Again, I think that's kind of like the theatre of it, like the strong enunciation of everything you say, like kind of perhaps that's kind of coming into it. I also think that with Zendaya, however you say her name, is that whilst I thought she was more consistently good in comparison to John David Washington, I didn't think she was like particularly brilliant. Like I think her acting level is kind of more middle of the road. Like she is competent, and when she got really emotional, it worked at points, but I kind of saw through the cracks of like the whole thing. Like a lot of points, like the film, it felt very much like two actors on stage, sort of, trying to like outperform one another. Like that's how it felt to me.
I don't think she was like incredible in this film, but I do think she looks a lot better by virtue of being stood opposite or next to John David Washington. Because she didn't feel like there were moments where like she was a little unconvincing, just in her line delivery, like just sometimes just wasn't buying it. But she did a lot more sort of acting with her face and with her posture, which I don't know.
She was very good at the quiet stuff. I think when she started like getting up to a bit more of a fever pitch, it was like less consistent. But absolutely the same thing for John David Washington. When he was quiet, when he was considered, he was like a lot more like powerful to witness. Where as soon as he started like throwing a strop, it was like, oh fucking hell, here we go again. But again, like I think a lot of it is down to the writing, like a lot of it. And if Sam Levinson, if Malcolm's character is that of a character insert for the director, you know, and it should be. I don't know if we mentioned Sam Levinson wrote it. I think we did. So if he's so like deeply tied to that character, he's going to be like really have a really specific idea of how he behaves, and maybe his input was just not particularly brilliant. Maybe.
I mean, as I said, I know that he's not a bad actor. I thought he was really bad in this. Yeah, I mean, the writing doesn't help. It doesn't really seem to have that much in the way of particularly interesting observations or funny jokes, which, I mean, when you've not got much to work with. But I mean, if you were going to talk about the directing, I actually thought for the most part the film felt pretty well directed. It looked nice. I think it would have made an excellent, like, I don't know, Hugo Boss advert or something.
Oh my god, that thought just fucking popped into my head. What the fuck? Get the fuck out of my head, Rupert.
Yeah, like
Jeez.
some kind of like perfume or like fashion brand advert. Like it would have been like a really good one of those, especially that like opening stint of him just dancing to the music. Yeah,
you know, it reminded me of, well, in terms of like a pairing, like a duo of people. There's like, is it Gucci or something? There's that ad with Lana Del Rey and Jared Leto in it.
I haven't seen it, but
those
it probably
vibes.
is something cringe like that.
Then just like walking around pastel-coloured shops, being like,
well, it has that like, because it really does kind of feel like an advert at the beginning, because it's got the loud music playing, and then like, you know, this suited and booted, you know, very handsome actor like jumping around on the furniture, and it's doing like a long take where it goes kind of through the house and then outside the window, and it like pans across and then it pans back. So, you know, there's it looks nice, and there's a definite style and a lot of care and attention put in. I'd also think it's pretty well edited. A little over dramatic at points. For the most part, I can't really be too mad at any of the technical elements of the film.
No, not at all.
And I actually thought the film look, because you could just tell this film is shot on film, of the black and white. You know, it didn't feel as pointless as I thought it might have done. It kind of worked, the whole like contrast element of it. Well, I thought it was.
I would say it looked brilliant, and I think like they absolutely nailed the aesthetic of you know, incorporating the black and white. But for me, I didn't really feel like it added anything. I feel like in terms of like, you know, contributing to the themes of what the film was going for.
I thought it worked.
It felt kind of.
It's on the nose. It's definitely on the nose, and I imagine it's also something they did to make shooting easier, because it sounds like they didn't have much time to make the film, and they were just trying to shoot it over the course of a few weeks or whatever. But it's thematically, I mean, you know, it's literally just like the contrast of two colours. You've got two people who have some kind of disagreement. I mean, thematically, that, you know, it's very basic, but it works. And the fact that they're in like such a sort of minimalist, pretentious, rich person house, I think lends itself well to that kind of look in a film. So it didn't bother me, honestly. I thought it was pretty good.
Oh, yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe there's something to be said for, sort of contributing to the themes. Oh, it's, you know, love isn't just black and white. It's maybe.
I mean, it's very film school, but it's like it worked.
I guess that's the feeling I got. It's like, sure, that maybe you could make a convincing argument for it, but my initial impression was one of just kind of incredulity, if you know what I mean, like just kind of.
Black and white. Look at you.
Yeah, exactly. Like, oh, here we go. And also, second film in a row we've done like new film that's black and white out of, you know, totally random chance. By the way.
That is.
Yeah, we've gone
strange.
Mank to Malcolm and Mary.
And weirdly,
3
I think
names
this
as
film.
well. Mank, Malcolm, Mary. Damn.
Oh Jesus, yeah, true.
Fucking hell.
A lot of M's. Yeah, and weirdly, I think this film has a better, in terms of just like the raw look, actually looks better than Mank, which feels very weird to say, given that I actually preferred Mank, and Mank was directed by David fucking Fincher.
I know, but just think how much better the performances in this film would have been if you had David Fincher on handling all that shit.
I give this film a 3 out of 10 It was desperately boring, not great acting. It had really bad writing, but it felt quite competent technically, and it wasn't completely unwatchable, but you would have to give me good money to come back to watch it again.
Right, yeah. I would give it a 5 out of 10, and I would echo some of the sentiments you have with it. I certainly wouldn't want to come back to this again. Like, on an emotional level, it's like quite difficult to deal with. Like, it should be sort of reiterated that I don't think I touched on it a huge amount, but the emotional effect of this film is still pretty like
it's too long,
tangible. But yeah, it drags on. There's the structurally, you kind of, a lot of times the argument feels resolved and then it just keeps going. It felt like it thought it was way more clever than it was, like, and that what it had to say was way more exciting and like riveting than it was. Like,
yeah.
There's certainly something to be said for this. Like, but like if this was like the crux of a film, like an hour's worth of a film, and then there was sort of like it was bookended by like a first act and a third act, and this was your second act, then I think that could work far better than having like a sort of hour 45 type long film of just people talking about the same shit over and over again, with two, you know, performances that teetered, particularly with John David Washington, from either just incredibly kind of like jarring and overly theatrical and chewing the scenery to like actually being quite like restrained and refined. Zendaya, again, kind of middle of the road, but sometimes really great as well. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of that. It's a simple film and it gets a simple 5 out of 10.
Yeah, I mean, it's on Netflix. I'm sure plenty of people will watch it just because it's got, you know, two very attractive actors, two very trendy actors on the front cover. It looks like it probably cost, you know, comparative to most films, pennies to make. And, you know, of all the things I could say about it, it doesn't feel passionless. It just feels like some of the passion here might be over-enthusiastic and misplaced.
Yeah, exactly that. Sam Levinson, try not to write yourself into your next film, please. And if you do, at least make him, like, somewhat likeable. Cheers.
Sam Levinson, we get it. You really want to be black.
Is that what this is?
I think it was. I think this was the directorial blackface.
Ooh, that's like a pull quote and a half.
If I wrote for Vox or something.
If I had to come up with like a big clickbait title for this podcast, it'd be like Malcolm and Marie is digital blackface, directorial blackface. I would fucking people would kick the fuck off if I said that.
Oh hell yeah. Well, you're fine because I said it, not you.
Well, true,
I'll be the one on
if I
on
put
the
it
stake.
as the title.
Yeah.
I said it depends what the kind of attention we want, Rupert.
I mean, you know,
I could do it.
Is there such thing as bad publicity? You know, there's only one way to find out.
Right, and the next film we're going to talk about, the classic film for this week, is Falling Down by none other than Joel Schumacher, who is a director with an interesting history, like kind of joint levels of fame and infamy. You know, beloved by many for some classic 80s films like St. Elmo's Fire and you know, the goth emo classic that is The Lost Boys, which you know, every scene kid on the planet had like some kind of tattooed reference to, I'm sure, at some point. But then, you know, was also responsible for two much maligned Batman films, most notably Batman and Robin, which for me as a kid that grew up when that came out when did that come out? That came out when I was about 3, I'm going to say.
It was in the 90s.
Yes, 97. No, so I was 2. So, you know, that I grew up around that film and I would see it on TV a bunch and it was just hilarious to me. Like, I never had this idea of like, oh, what a piece of whoever made this has ruined Batman, because to me it was like, this is just like wonderfully like flamboyant and like cartoonish, and my childlike mind was like bright colours.
I just thought it was badass. I was like, this is great.
yeah, and Arnold Schwarzenegger was in it, and you know, I think there's something very sort of cartoonish about him as a human being. I remember loving everything that he was in, even from like a very small kid, and so seeing him dressed up as Dr. Freeze was saying ice puns all over the shop was just fantastic. So I had no complaints. So I personally harbour no ill will towards Joel Schumacher, who sadly passed away last year. Big rip to a classic director, with a very interesting history. And we're diving into one of his most interesting and most celebrated films, Falling Down, with Michael Douglas and Robert Duvall. Now, I said last podcast that the reason I wanted to pick this film was because my dad shared an anecdote from this film about Michael Douglas encountering some golfers, and how my dad, as a passionately anti-golf man himself, was absolutely enthralled when Michael Douglas watches a man have a heart attack on a golf course and laughs at him. And I was intrigued by that prospect. I was like, what kind of film are we getting for here? And I realised now why my dad loved it so much, because this really is Old Man Yells at Cloud, the movie.
Yeah, that was the best scene as well.
That's a fantastic scene, but it is literally a series of scenarios in which Michael Douglas goes around some sort of minor social inconvenience that he can kind of twist into like a grand statement about society, and he goes off on one. He has a rant, and then he does something violent, and then he moves on to the next set piece. There's certainly a lot of sort of twisted entertainment and joy you can get out of some of these scenes, but as a whole film, I have some issues, and but first I'm going to ask you, Rupert, what did you think about Falling Down?
Well, I too had some issues. Specifically, I was really worried I was going to hate this film. From the first opening 30 minutes, I was like, "Ooh."
Was that I guess elephant in the room? The first encounter he has.
The first two encounters he had.
Which are really kind of racially charged.
Yes. This is not a film that I think has aged well.
No.
And will continue to age very, very poorly. I was cringing a lot, but I didn't think the film was badly made. In fact, my very first experience with the film, the opening montage I thought was, weirdly enough, probably the best part of the film, apart from maybe the golf scene, which is excellent.
Yeah.
I really, really love the opening scene of him in traffic, where it's kind of like this almost musical montage of buzzing and loud noises and screaming children, and it's all claustrophobic, and you have these really garish close-ups on his face and all the sweat, and you can really feel the LA heat just beating down, and
and you can totally understand why a man experiencing this
sensory overload,
sensory overload would suddenly just kind of snap and go fuck it.
Because we've all been in that mode where it's just a bit too hot, it's a bit too loud, everything's kind of fucking grating on you. So that was really relatable and really good, and I thought Michael Douglas did a really good job, and I think he does a pretty great job throughout the film. Actually, I think his performance actually really carries a lot of even the pretty uncomfortable dated scenes. He is consistently, even though I think the character is, I think the core problem I have with this film is that the film is clearly written for you to sympathise with the character, and after a lot of the stuff he does through the first portion of the film, he's really, really difficult to sympathise with, because he's kind of an absolutely irredeemable cunt.
He's psychotic to a level that you just kind of can't come back from, and it's very apparent out of the gate that there's not much that he's going to do to show a softer side of himself. But
you do get the softer side, and I understand the structure of having him be a little edgier at the beginning, and then he becomes more likeable as this kind of backstory is revealed. And I thought that as that backstory came in, it did make me like him more, and it was effective in that regard. But you have the first encounter in the shop, where you have this basically Asian shop stereotype, this Korean guy, which was the abuse of retail workers in this film was very, very triggering for me, because having worked in retail and just generally just despising, he's like a male Karen, this stuff in this shop is too expensive. I can't use my coupon, whatever, or like the thing in the fast food restaurant where he's like, I want breakfast. I was just kind of like, oh, how am I supposed to sympathise with this guy who's just demanding breakfast? Like, if it says the fucking breakfast menu is over, you can't fucking order breakfast. And like, I feel like the film is kind of gunning for you to agree with him in these situations, and so it does feel a bit muddled. But I think the film improves as it goes on.
Well, I think it's something interesting, like a parallel I was not anticipating going into this, because I thought, right, I've selected Falling Down. I know we're gonna watch Malcolm and Maria, and I'm like, wait, why are we doing a podcast with these two films sat side by side? I mean, it was random. It was entirely random, and it's just like whatever. But I never did I expect there to be such a strong parallel between the two, which is that the main character feels like a massive insert for the writer. This film isn't written by Joel Schumacher, so you can't feel, but he did then still include a bunch of shit about, you know, racially abusing a Korean man, so, you know, tit for tat. But, you know, different times and different things were acceptable, unfortunately. So it does feel like every time he kind of comes out with some new rant, that it's like some kind of like scathing and witty kind of retort at like the state of the current society, a lot of which still carries over very much to like modern day, you know. And, you know, there are some things that you do agree with, but that is the problem with it is then that he will go and do something so outrageous and like awful at a different point in the film that you can't sympathise with. So you're kind of constantly at odds with your relationship with the character, which again is fine if you can kind of balance that out well. And for me, like, even when it does establish, you know, that he... So the kind of crux of the film is that he's separated from his wife and his daughter, and he's like kind of just had a psychotic break and is like, I'm seeing my daughter, it's her birthday, I'm seeing her. But like, he never really softens up on that side. He just constantly threatens his wife over the phone and acts really unhinged. There's never a moment of this, or rather the moments of clarity are so sparse and so small. When he's acting like a fucking nutter to his wife, I think that's actually the most irredeemable stuff in the film, because sure, him being a cunt at the beginning with all the racial stuff is really fucking awkward and uncomfortable, but when you're trying to redeem the character with something oh, here's the the soft core at the heart of this, this toughened exterior, and then even at the core he is a piece of shit. You've lost me.
I mean, I think the film is just very politically conservative in a lot of ways, and it does seem to make some kind of attempt at sort of a centrism type place with a couple moments I'll get onto, but the general, if you just watch the first 30 minutes of the film, the message you'd take away from it would basically be immigrants are all money grubbers, Hispanics are all murderous gangsters, and homeless people are just lazy scroungers.
God, I forgot about the homeless part. Jesus.
And the much like Malcolm and Maria, as you were saying, the Michael Douglas's character is essentially written to speak for the audience against these social ills, and that's sort of social ills, inverted commas. And you're sort of supposed to side with him, and that sort of feels like it's supposed to be the catharsis of the film, right? The appeal of it, but it feels completely unrelatable, and it just feels pretty grim. I don't think there's even a way anybody can objectively look at a film, but since it doesn't, that goes completely against any political opinions I have. I found that very difficult to relate to.
Right.
But the film does seem, because it's just focusing in on individual actors. When it seems like this guy's problems are mostly, systemic. The fact that he's separated from his wife because they had an unhappy relationship, and he's got all of these money issues and stuff. It seems like a lot of the issues that he has and his unhappy upbringing, which is also implied. A lot of these issues he's facing might be systemic, and he's just kind of taking them out on people that he sees as at least less than him. And I guess the film does kind of... One of the interesting elements was... Do you remember the scene with the guy getting arrested, and he's got the not economically viable thing where he's screaming and shouting? That was almost like the turning point for me, because in a way that could be seen as changing that everything I just said, that moment kind of could be a way for the film to actually comment on the fact that what the character did in the first portion of the film is like really, really weird and fucked up. It doesn't really go there, I don't think. But
no, because it doesn't really delve into what happens with any further than just that little snapshot.
Well, I like the imagery. I like the imagery of him seeing this guy, this black guy on the street, screaming about how he's not economically viable. Everyone ignoring him, and then him kind of looking at him, and then just kind of moving on.
And they acknowledge one another. They kind of nod to each other and then carry on. It's like, but also I understand the struggle.
But the moment could have been played like he sees this guy who clearly who understands essentially what I just outlined, that a lot of the problems that lead people to these kind of violent sprees are like systematic problems and not the fault of like individual people or minorities or demographics or whatever. He sees this person who does understand that he's not economically viable and then kind of ignores him and goes on, because that kind of shows, right, the character is ignorant. I thought that you could have read that, but I don't think the film made it didn't quite deliver it in that way. You know what I mean?
I think a thing that the film could have done which would have been interesting, is have him like defend him, because he's like, this man is like, you know, sort of symbolic of my own struggles. Yeah, fuck the police. Like, and he goes off on like another rant, but it's like this weird, strange moment of quiet, which it's unusual. It's like maybe like the only scene like it in the entire film.
It is, yeah. It was probably the most memorable.
They do seem to look at each other. They do seem to like acknowledge one another, as though there is this unspoken understanding.
Well, that's what I found kind of confusing, because they have the moment of understanding where it's like, oh, I know what this guy's talking about, and then he does reference it later at the very climax of the film. The message there seems muddled to me, because the main character in that moment seems to acknowledge that these two guys are in similar places, and then with not economically viable, meaning that they're both kind of victims of the system, of systematic issues. But that isn't really reflected in what the character had done up until that point, and the moment isn't really played like a moment of realization or anything. It's played like a moment of recognition between them. So while I think it's like a good and interesting scene, I don't think it really matches up with what the film's actually saying.
It felt like it could have been like a more poignant moment for like the character to show some kind of humanity, and instead they choose to make it either very subtle or kind of avoid showing more humanity, which again didn't help me in my feeling that he was just like kind of a cold, emotionless like husk of a man that's just, you know, beyond redemption. But I think it was like a comment on capitalism in a way. I remember watching a really interesting video on YouTube a while back called like the Cubicle Movie, like analysing the Cubicle Movie. And this idea that, you know, in decades previous to the 90s, films had always kind of been centered around like there'd always been this kind of like righteous struggle for like this really apparent like sense of good and evil in films and stuff like that, and like in like big films, and that each generation before the 90s was kind of affected by war. So like that came out in like the nature of like the films. Like it was like, there's an enemy, we have to survive. And so like there's this weird strange turning point in the 90s where we kind of achieve some level of peace. The Cold War kind of bubbles, you know, goes down. The Berlin Wall falls over. The Berlin Wall comes down, falls over. Like it just fucking was like propped up with a bit of fucking
a strong gust of, you know, a strong breeze.
Strong gust of wind.
I would like to report this strong breeze has finished communism once and for all.
There's this sort of idea that, you know, society enters like peacetime for the first time in decades, and people don't know what to do with that peace. They find themselves all in sort of somewhat comfortable office jobs, and they realize they become part of like a comfortable but like somewhat abusive system where it's just like, I am a cog in the machine, and I turn up to work and I do this. So you've got films like this film, you've got films like Office Space, which is probably the most like blatantly about that, because it's
the
literally
Matrix.
Like, and then you got The Matrix, exactly, where, you know, the big reveal is like, you know, you are still in a war. Like, you don't be fooled. There is no peace. Like, the mundanity of life is not real. And this film kind of addresses that as well. Like, this is a man that sort of had a day job. He's, you know, dressed in like such stereotypical office attire, and he just loses his mind because like the system has just crushed his soul. And as irredeemable as a lot of his actions are, some of what he says at certain points, as we've said, you know, are kind of relatable, even if they are kind of petty and kind of picking at like minor foibles of a grander system. Like the fact that he's even on this kind of ongoing rampage is like, he's only there because like the system failed him so greatly. And that, I think that's reflected in the other main character in this film, Robert Duvall's Prendergast, who's like this sort of down on his luck cop who's got like a nervous wreck of a wife who and he's like confined to his desk because of her fears of him like dying whilst investigating something. And it kind of goes, you know, he ends up like being the only one realizing that like all these like acts of violence across the city are happening because of this one bloke. But you see the way that the police treat him as like a sort of outsider to like the normal way of existing. Like he doesn't quite fit in, and so they shun him. They mock him, or they actively tell him to his face, like, we don't like you. You're, you know, because you act outside of the established norms, you are untrustworthy. And I think it's like interesting to see how the film shows how one character deals with that kind of being shunned by society and being in like this uncomfortable, compromised situation, and how the other kind of gains strength and kind of fights back. One character, you know, like Michael Douglas on the other hand, just kind of crumbles.
Yeah, it was like thematically interesting, like the way the film parallels, you know, essentially someone who's kind of seems to have resigned his life to servicing the system versus someone who is, you know, breaking out of the system. Again, I think, you know, the reason the golf scene is such a good scene is because I think it's one of the few instances where he's actually sort of speaking truth to power, like the film portrays him as having been doing the entire time.
Right.
Because he is actually, you know, yelling at even though he's still being a dick. I did, you know, at that point I did sort of feel vindicated by him because he is shouting at someone in power, you know, this rich guy who's mad that someone is, you know, walking in front of him when, you know, you essentially break the whole thing down. That was like, you know, that actually felt, you know, kind of real. And I guess the film does sort of make a more sort of non-political, I mean, again, it sort of tries to like weigh itself out in sort of a sort of both sides kind of way with the whole sort of Nazi guy.
Yes.
Which was also which is where the film kind of reveals itself, because I was really like kind of disturbed by the first parts of the film, and then I feel like it just kind of revealed itself to be just a kind of very broadly patriotic film in that portion, and that was kind of the core driving political message of it. And you know, that's also, you know, a pretty good scene because this guy is actually a dick. And you know, not to say that, you know, the gangsters and the shopkeeper and whatever aren't mean characters, but they feel like caricatures.
Yes, they do. Absolutely.
And there is like a difference, I feel, between, you know, like the Nazis also a caricature, but there is a difference between a film caricaturing an actual white supremacist and just like,
I think it's different to caricature someone based on their beliefs than based on their like race,
exactly, yeah, that's what I was trying to say. Yeah, I agree with you that Robert Duvall, there's like it's an interesting sort of water to the fire in a way, because he's much more subdued, and his like portions of the film are kind of more, they're much quieter and less like upfront and kind of cheesy. They're much more like restrained, and I mean, they're still, you know, there's not, I wouldn't call it subtle in the grand you know, scheme of things of all films, but for this film it felt like a nice sort of
palate cleanser. Yeah,
exactly. Like the whole thing with him, the relationship he had with the female cop, I thought was like quite cute, and like the you know, the way, you know, you can tell exactly what's going to happen. I mean, I guess a mild spoiler, but you know, the way you can tell it's building up to him standing up to his dickhead bosses and colleagues and his really annoying wife. I guess that's another thing. This film does kind of, it seems to take a fairly dim view of women as well.
Well, actually, I'm not sure I agree with that, because I think that the subplot, or rather the aspect of the A plot in which the wife of Michael Douglas's character is desperately trying to get the police to take her seriously is actually, I don't know whether it's intentional or not, because it's hard to tell with a film that's got so many sort of conflicting viewpoints. Like, oh, we've got like really awkward, shit about, racial humor that hasn't aged well at all, but we've also got stuff that's like, yeah, fuck the Nazis. So it's like, where does this film stand?
Yeah.
But it seems to me, accidental or otherwise, to take a stand, again, like with women not being taken seriously regarding domestic abuse.
I don't know. I don't know if that's what it was going for.
Well, here's the thing: is that's why I preface it like whether it's accidental or not, because it's something you could easily read into the film, and it kind of what the film portrays. Because she goes through like several. She's threatened by her husband on the phone, who she has a restraining order against. The guy comes around and says, and then asks her like, "Oh, when did he hit you?" And she's like, "No, he never hit me. I got the restraining order, so he wouldn't." And then he's like, he gives her a look like as though to say, "Then why the fuck did you call me? Like, why the fuck are you wasting my time? And why did you get the restraining order or whatever?" Like, not like listening or trusting in like the woman's in a woman's voice to say, "I'm being abused," or "I'm in danger." And then another the next cop that comes along is a woman who is even more like kind of upfront and just like, deal with your own shit type thing. This isn't police business. And then at the end she gets fucking accosted by and held up by her psychopath violent husband. So her cries of anguish, and we know as the audience that she needs to be believed, which is why I think it kind of supports this angle where it's like we understand the danger she's in more than she does, and we see her being sort of abused or disregarded by the system again.
I don't know if that's what it was going for. I felt like at the first portion of the film, I felt like the film was leading the viewer to find her to be a little unreasonable, because it has the whole thing about how the cop, the male cop, maybe this is just me seeing the scene differently, but the male cop seems to me in the first part of the film to be sort of as reasonable as he possibly can, but then she is kind of shown up by her own like lack of credibility for why she's so scared of her husband.
Right.
In terms of any actual reasoning. And then there's the whole thing about how he was sort of made an example of in court. He was like unfairly treated during their breakup, which kind of leads me to think that, whatever the effect is, I just felt like the film was kind of leading it more in that direction. This isn't a major gripe for me, but again, because I feel like to get the maximum amount of enjoyment from this film, you have to sympathise with the character. You can't just understand him. Like, you can't just say like, oh, what the film is trying to present is this is a guy who has broken out of the system, and he's just confronting the everyday injustices, and he's saying all the things that you're too afraid to say, but look at him say it here. So like, you can't just say like, oh, the film isn't taking a morally ambivalent view of the character. It's like it is kind of endorsing him
to some extent. I feel like there's a kind of dichotomy there. I feel like it
does seem to cut off more as it goes on, but like there is like a whole element of like
I think it sympathizes with him rather than actively promoting everything he does. But like as soon as he starts talking and ranting, like I think there's a difference between the film promoting the violence that the man causes, although there is a certain amount of like sort of schadenfreude in that, in that it's fun to watch a man kind of just like break out of like the establishment and be like, put a middle finger up to stuff you might wish you could do. There's ultimately saying things and then doing those things are like two very different things. I agree. I think like what I'm trying to say is that I feel like the film is massively conflicted in that regard, and similarly it makes it very difficult to kind of stomach the character.
I feel sort of divorced enough from the culture of the US for it to not really hold back my enjoyment, because I think at its core it's actually pretty well directed across the board. I really liked the use of music was pretty good in it. There were a lot of scenes that didn't have any, which was nice, kind of actually added to the tension.
No, I like that.
And there were like the violence you were talking about, I actually thought for the most part, it felt so fantastical and silly, and in a way.
Yeah.
The way he plays like this really sort of dumpy office guy as kind of like stone
like a
cold
badass.
like action
Yeah.
hero. Yeah. Like,
Yeah, true.
I think that's kind of like as a conceit for a character, even with like all the stuff, all the complaints I've had. I think that's just like an inherently very entertaining thing to see. This like. Yeah. This kind of like shirt tucked in office guy with a briefcase, but he's kind of acting like John Wayne. I think there's just something great about that.
I think that the comedy factor for people of a slightly older generation than us, because we were, we weren't even born when this. Yeah, I think like my dad was in his like early 30s watching this, so like it has a very different kind of appeal to those people because. I don't know, growing up in like a culture where different things are acceptable, like you feel comfortable laughing at certain things in certain ways.
Yeah.
I'm sure a bunch of shit that we laugh at now. In fact, I know for a fact that a bunch of shit I laughed at last decade is no longer like above board.
Right.
It's already changed that quickly.
I don't think anyone's like a racist for enjoying this film, by the way.
No. That shouldn't be what is taken away from what I'm saying. I'm saying that like I think the hilarity of like the comedy of what you said, like this character in this situation is like a stone cold badass versus all the funny things, the stuff he says, all the ways he like kind of he sticks his finger up at the system, like to an audience who sort of grew up at that time, this was probably like hysterical. This was probably like super like witty and funny. And to us, it's just like dated quite bad.
But at its core, I think what you're saying, like I agree, the core premise of the film, even when it's kind of cringe and not great, the core premise of the film is just kind of inherently, there's something kind of engaging and like appealing about it. And like, as we were saying, it's it's well directed, it's well acted, pretty much across the board. But like, there's enough appeal in the premise for when it does work, and it's not got those kind of issues going, like the golf scene, like the Nazi scene. Well,
I also quite enjoyed the burger scene that you didn't like. I enjoyed that one.
I like it, but like
because I fucking hate fast food places. Like that whole element of culture that's still so pervasive really irks me. Like this sort of like fake sunshiny like smiley face like. Can I take your order? Like it's so fake. It's like one of the most like transparently like manipulative elements of like capitalism.
I liked the sort of nihilistic feeling of the guy. I mean, there's just something, I guess this is also a little dated, but this is just more funny to me than like actually offensive, of a guy walking into a public space with a big bag full of guns and then the situation is funny to me, but it's the whole thing of all of the grievances he has, the injustice of him not being served his meal. Obviously, the joke is that like this is something that people find annoying. Oh, how come they just can't give me breakfast? I want breakfast.
Yeah, it's like it's right there.
Yeah,
it's like just give me breakfast.
I understand that, but like I don't know. There was I'm kind of conflicted because it's like it's just so petty. But like
it is.
There's the way he treats it makes it so absurd that it's kind of funny.
I think basically if this film was framed ever so slightly differently, with some less awkward scenes towards the beginning and a more sympathetic character whose flaws weren't so like crushingly all-consuming, then I could have like found this like to be absolutely hilarious. As it stands, I find it to be like a sort of fun curio from the 90s. I can watch it as kind of like, oh, isn't this an interesting timepiece? Like, and I enjoy the aesthetic of it. Like, there's for me, like I was thinking about Heat watching this because like another 90s film. Like, I don't watch a huge amount from the decade I was born, and but when I do, I always find that I'm sort of lured into it. Like, wow, this is this mystical time where I was like an infant. Like, it's more nostalgic to me and like more retro to me than anything like be further back than that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I got a lot out of the visuals from this film, and yeah, that aesthetic.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, just some elements just really haven't aged that well. I think it's kind of as simple as that.
Like I don't know if this film, like you said, I don't know if this film really is like a criticism of capitalism. So much of it's just like a criticism of
Just some
like annoying people.
Yeah,
Because I don't really think there's
Maybe.
anything in here that's really like that critical of the system within
there's
which
the
he
sort of
exists.
stuff you sort of discover towards the end, like, you know, there's the bit where he like sort of breaks into a guy's back garden to escape the police, and he discovers the guy that lives in this like mansion is a plastic surgeon, and he sort of reveals, oh yeah, well I wish I'd gotten into that line of work. They lied to me about, you know, how profitable my field was going to be, and it turns out he's working in like weapons industry, which, you know, hardly a noble cause, but he was like, the system kind of betrayed me because, you know, people get rewarded for these like inane like something that he considers totally bullshit, and he's like, well, I mean, here's the thing, is I can't help but like kind of view it with like a modern lens, and I guess I perhaps have imbued this as being a more lefty liberal film than it actually is. You're probably right. It's probably achingly centrist.
More than anything, it felt like a criticism of bureaucracy, because most of the things that so you've got the police chief thing, which is clearly like, oh well, I just want to go out and solve it, and you know, there's all these other cops, you know, getting in the way, and my, you know, dickhead manager who's like, you know, sits behind the desk and he's like a paper pusher, and then you've got like you've on top of that you got like the whole thing where he's angry at the oh, you're just doing these roadworks and holding everyone up because you want to keep your budget or something, and you know, you need to spend your budget, and you know, and like, oh, you won't let me have the breakfast meal because it's like 11 o'clock or whatever. Like, to me it felt like, yeah, it's more a criticism. Like, I don't think there's ever a point of the film where it makes any pointed criticism of like, you know, the society, you know, which we live in.
That's true. I guess the thing is, it's not impossible to infer that, like, you know, hence why I've arrived at that conclusion. But maybe you're right in that because it never tries to, like, I guess, tie together all of the things it complains about and say, well, if you look at this as a greater whole, this is what I'm actually saying. It just kind of, it still feels like very scatterbrained, very like isolated incidents of, you know.
Yeah, it's more of like a sketch show of grievances as opposed to like a unifying essay of like issues with the system. But as I said, even the moments that were dated and horrible, I think are well executed, and I think the film stands up as like a fun piece of entertainment. But yeah, it's just from a different era. Yeah, I'd give it a 6 out of 10.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. A 6 out of 10. Like, as you just put it, nothing in this film was like so bad that it kind of to put me off the entire thing. There are its awkward moments that show its age, but the experience was, you know, it pretty consistently enjoyable and like either baffling or, you know, genuinely funny. You sort of over the top cartoonish, and you know, the kind of the police procedural side of it is quite, there's some gripping stuff there. Yeah, it's just like a film from a different era. It is fun, but it's, I guess, not this mind-blowing experience that I had hoped for. I thought I might be getting myself in for like a banger.
It's a film that I think I might. I probably won't return to it anytime soon, but I might, you know, go on YouTube and, you know, look up the golf scene again. Watch the Nazi scene again. You know, it's got its crowd pleasy, satisfying moments, and at the end of the day, you know, you can't. Sometimes, you know, you don't even get that. So, yeah, 6 out of 10, above average.
So there it is. That was us talking about Falling Down and Malcolm and Marie. A thoroughly average week, as it would seem.
Yeah.
Nothing really that spicy, I'm afraid. But Rupert, you have a new film for us or rather an old film for us to tackle next time. That you know, get us out of the doldrums. Get us out of this 5s and 6s.
See, I've got this problem where I've only recommended like films that I really like, but I kind of can't. There's some really bad films I could recommend, but I'm gonna put in another film that I really like that I know you haven't seen.
Okay.
I'm gonna recommend Der Untergang or Downfall.
Ah, shit.
Which is
sick.
a film many people
ages.
only know for the meme scene where Hitler shouts a lot of people, but it's a very, 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 very good film in my opinion. I haven't seen it in a while, but I've seen it multiple times. But it's been a good few years. I guess, I'm topping this week in terms of unlikable protagonists, since we're now moving to Hitler.
To Hitler.
It's a strong choice. It's a strong choice,
Well, it's hard to go lower than that, so maybe that's a good baseline that we need to return to.
Yeah, exactly. So if this week's theme was unlikable characters, maybe next week will just be like completely irredeemable characters. I think unlike the two films which we covered today, I think this film does a pretty good job of handling having a completely unbearable, disgusting character as its main focus. So that would be interesting to look at. And it's got the meme scene. You've all seen it. Yeah, watch Downfall.
I'm excited. Yeah, absolutely. Right. Well, if you guys watch Downfall, and I know all two of you will, then we will catch you in a couple weeks' time to discuss, how much we hate Hitler. So yeah,
fuck yeah, we're gonna change this to the Fuck Hitler podcast, coming out with all the hot takes. Did you know Hitler? Pretty bad. Not a good guy. Bit of a cunt.
Don't know if you knew that. Right, well, with that, on that note, we will end it here. Cheers for listening, and we will catch you in a little bit. Peace.